Hello and welcome back to Your Money Always Matters. My name is Ladia and I am a retired licensed financial professional with over 40 years in the financial services industry. And even though I have retired, I still enjoy sharing this information with you so that you can have meaningful conversations with your family as well as other financial professionals. And today what I want to talk about is Medicaid spend down program. My last video, I talked about Medicaid's 5-year look back period, but this is just another component that is used by Medicaid to help determine eligibility for Medicaid long-term care benefits. What I've often heard people say is that Medicaid, when you apply, you have to be broke. You can't have any money. And I've also heard that Medicaid makes you spend all of your money first before you become eligible for long-term care benefits. And that's where I want to start this conversation because it is very important to know that Medicaid does look at a couple things when determining your financial eligibility for long-term care, and that is assets and income. And if someone's countable assets exceeds the state's resource limit, then that person may need to look at reducing their assets to financially be eligible for Medicaid long-term care benefits. And each state has their own name for the type of program they may have. Some of them are called a spend down program, and some of them are called the medically needy program. According to the National Council on Aging, these programs may allow someone whose income exceeds the medical limit to use qualifying medical expenses to reduce that excess income for eligibility purposes. And here's something very important. Not every state has the same type of spend down program. Each state administers its own program. And so as I move through this video and I use the term spend down, I'm really using that generally to describe the program that is used to help individuals use some of their assets to become eligible for Medicaid long-term care benefits. So just know that each state administers its own program. Let's talk about countable assets. Countable assets are resources that Medicaid uses in determining whether or not you meet the financial requirements. And depending upon your state and your circumstances, those countable assets can be things such as your banking or savings accounts, stocks and bonds, mutual funds, and other investments, your brokerage accounts, certain retirement accounts, and other real estate or other property that isn't exempt. Let's say someone has $150,000 in savings and investments, and now they need long-term nursing home care. So if they apply for Medicaid and if that dollar amount puts them over their state's resource limit, then they may need to use some of those resources or spend down those resources to help pay for some of their long-term care as well as other items that are permissible by Medicaid. And so that is a perfect example of spend down. And that's where it hit very close to home for me. Because while I was working at a brokerage firm, I had a client call. She was a full power of attorney over her mother's modest IRA that was held at the firm. What she needed to do was to liquidate the account and request a check for the proceeds. And so as she and I talked through the transaction, she stated that her mother was applying for long-term benefits with Medicaid and that she also needed to use some of these assets to help pay for some of her long-term care and other items in reducing that cost so that she can be eligible for the benefits for long-term care for Medicaid. And that is another example of spend down. And so that shows you just how much Medicaid looks at your financial situation when it comes to your assets to help determine if you qualify or meet the financial requirements for long-term care Medicaid benefits. Medicaid does not always count everything that you own, and that's where we get into exempt assets. And those can be things like your primary residence. It could also be a vehicle, other things like your home furnishings that you have, as well as some of your personal items. And that may also include certain burial or funeral arrangements. And of course, all of this depends upon your circumstances and your state guidelines. Now, the next thing that I want to look at is going to be the income part that Medicaid looks at as well when determining that eligibility. For Medicaid purposes, your Social Security check, your pension, as well as your disability payments can all be considered income when looking at the income requirements for Medicaid. And again, according to the National Council on Aging, qualified medical expenses may be used to help spend down excess income in order for an individual to fall below the income limit that is required for Medicaid. And not every state has a medically needy program, so you'll certainly want to check with your state to see if that is something that is offered. Other states may use different approaches when it comes to their applicants exceeding that dollar limit. That's why I don't want you to let a dollar amount or a procedure that you hear on a video to determine the amount for you. It is always going to be determined by the state that you live in and under their guidelines. So, again, the best recommendation is to seek the guidance of your local Medicaid office. So let's say you qualify for Medicaid and Medicaid is paying for your long-term nursing care. So what happens to your Social Security? Well, that's when I would normally hear people say that Medicaid takes your Social Security check. Well, the better way to explain that is that once a person goes into long-term nursing care and using Medicaid benefits, that monthly income is also used to help pay for some of those benefits. And that could mean money from your Social Security, your benefits, or disability going towards your long term care. Now, does Medicaid let you keep anything? Yes, it actually does. A nursing home resident receiving Medicaid is typically allowed to retain a personal needs allowance. So, what about married couples? Well, if there is a spouse at home, there is a spousal impoverishment rule that may allow for some of that income to come back into the household to help that spouse. And that's why you cannot apply the rules for a single individual when determining eligibility and income to be the same for a married couple. So now let's put everything together because there's several different concepts that I'd like for you to keep separate. The first one is asset spend down. If your countable assets exceed the dollar amount for Medicaid financial eligibility, then that's where you'll have to look at spending down some of those assets or using some of those assets to help pay for qualifying medical expenses before you qualify for Medicaid. Next is the income spend down, and that's where you're using your income, whether it's Social Security, disability, or pension, to help to reduce the dollar amount that you have for Medicaid eligibility as well. And then there's a couple other things that I've talked about in a previous video, and that is the 5-year look back period for Medicaid, where Medicaid looks back at financial transactions for the previous 60 months or 5 years to determine if assets were sold or given away for less than their actual value, just so that an individual can qualify for Medicaid. And the next thing is estate recovery. Now, estate recovery, that comes in under a different section as well. And that is usually done once an individual that is receiving Medicaid passes and the state looks to recover some of the cost of those Medicaid payments from an individual's estate. So, as you can see, there's a lot of things that go into the eligibility for Medicaid. And of course, I just wanted to bring this information to you to help you understand some of these terms so that if you or a family member, if you're looking at Medicaid, then these are some of the things that you'll certainly want to look at and research for yourself as well. Thank you for watching once again. And I hope that you will subscribe to my channel and come back because your money always matters.